من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Inshallah, as we heard, the topic is about taking the book بقوة, with strength and power, which is part of a verse that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to the Prophet ﷺ in more than one place, that this should be the case with the ummah, with the nation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent a messenger to. They were commanded to take the book of Allah, whatever the book of Allah, like the Torah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered the people of Bani Israel at the time of Musa alayhi salam to take the book with quwwah, with power and strength. And also the same thing for the ummah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And part of that, inshallah ta'ala, briefly we'll talk some of the guidelines when it comes to things that are of amusement and entertainment and things that people would enjoy to do in this life. What's the guideline? Since every action that we do in this life with ilm, with knowledge, it is categorized in one of the 5 ahkam. So these types of principles makes it easy for us. The deen of Islam is comprehensive. Every matter in our life is part of the deen. So either that what we do is obligatory, or wal'adhu billah, the ruling of it, it's haram, or it's makruh, disliked, or mustahab, recommended act, or it's mubah, it's permissible. So these are the ahkam al-khamsa, the 5 rulings, that every matter comes under one of these rulings. So then if it's wajib, if it's fard, if it's an obligation, then we know what that means. That means it's a principle in the deen, we have to do it. It's haram to miss it and to do it the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. If it's haram, then we stay away from it, no excuse in the haram, and so on and so forth. So the first part, which is to take the religion basically with quwwah, with strength. And this is a reminder for each and every one of us, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creator of the heavens and the earth, the owner of all things. And as we heard last weekend, when Sheikh Karim Hafidahullah was talking about the names and attributes of Allah, we need to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When a person know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with his names and attributes, know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through his book, the Quran, and the Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, then the heart will be filled with the love of Allah, the fear of Allah, the hope for the rewards of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the khushu', the humbleness, the submission. So then when we talk about physical actions or things to be said, you would find yourself at ease with it. This is the joy of this life, is to be obedient to Allah, to feel that we have been permitted to worship Allah. For the believers, when they get to know that Allah forbade something for them, this is an honor for a person to know, versus those who would try not to know actually what's haram, or to try to find a way to make it not haram, or change in the deen of Allah, or find an easy way out. It's supposed to be the opposite. But as long as this is the haqq, this is the truth that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed, and this is the covenant of our iman. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to Bani Israel, خُذُوا مَا أَتَيْنَاكُمْ بِقُوَّةٍ وَاذْكُرُوا مَا فِي, take what I have given you with quwwah, with strength, with power, and وَاذْكُرُوا مَا فِي, and another ayah, وَاسْمَعُوا, and listen. Take it with strength and listen. Be obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The quwwah, and he said also to Yahya alayhi salam, Ya Yahya khudh al-kitaba biquwwah. O Yahya, take the book with quwwah, with strength. And the word quwwah in Arabic means power. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-qawi, the most powerful subhanahu wa ta'ala. And specifically, when we talk about the definition of al-quwwah, or the strength, what a person needs quwwah for, strength for, that means he has to do something that has some form of a challenge or some form of a difficulty, something that a person has to exert some power to be able to achieve it. Right? So when someone is told, you need to have quwwah and strength to be able to lift something, right? So that means this thing is not easy to lift. You have to put your effort to lift it. So this is what quwwah is. It is not something to be perceived, the quwwah as something without any effort, without any struggle, that's what al-quwwah is, or the strength and the power. So therefore, tahammul al-mashaq, to bear the difficulties. This is part of being human beings. If human beings do not bear difficulties, they won't be able to even build one structure. They have to, bear these types of things upon themselves and struggle and be patient and do things that they don't like. So this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us as human beings. And the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the means of salvation and to be among the believers, it requires for the person to make mujahada. وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. Those who struggle in our path, we will guide them. But it's since this religion is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so it's all in the capacity of the human beings, and it's a detailed subject with every aspect of matters of knowledge that are the knowledge for us to learn to be able to fulfill it in the right way. So one important thing when it comes to this taking the matter with strength, if you look at the story of Yahya alayhi salam, or where the ayah is mentioned in Surah Maryam. Surah Maryam talks about the story of Isa alayhi salam, but in the beginning talks about Zakaria alayhi salam when he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that إني وهن العظم مني واشتعل الرأس شيبة ولم أكن بدعائك ربي شقيا وإني خفت الموالي من ورائي وكانت امرأتي عاقرة فهب لي من لدنك وليا يرثني ويرث من آل يعقوب واجعله ربي رضيا. So Zakaria, a messenger of Allah, asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for what? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bestow upon him an offspring, waliyan yarithuni, he would inherit from me and from Al Yaqub. Inherit what? Anybody knows what was the job of Zakaria alayhi salam? Was he having lots of money? It was said that he was a carpenter. So he was not something, or even the prophets of Allah in general, they don't ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for offsprings to make sure that they carry their wealth in the right way, but to carry the message that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala entrusted him with, having the concern towards Bani Israel, especially when he witnessed their weakness, the weakness of matters of deen. And specifically here, when the word says, يَرِثُنِي وَيَرِثُ مِنْ آلِ يَعْقُوبَ وَاجْعَلْهُ رَبِّ رَضِيًّا إِنِّي خِفْتُ الْمَوَالِي. Al-Mawali, the relatives, the people of Bani Israel. Min wara'i, that means when he was, alayhi salam, at his years of strength, he was upon the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the way it's supposed to be. So he saw from the way that he sees of Bani Israel, they're not up to that responsibility. To take the banner of the deen, to take the responsibility of the deen, to establish the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he feared for them that the religion will be lost in the generations to come. We see that in our life. Look at the generations to come, and everything is by the mercy of Allah. Even ourselves, let along the generations to come. So something has to be done. So we have to take the matter seriously with strength and to pass on this matter to the next generation and to the next generation. And that's why afterwards, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the glad tidings to Zakaria alayhi salam with Yahya, what is the first thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to Yahya? Now the dua is accepted. And Zakaria was old in age. And his wife is barren, she does not give birth. And he had the concern for Bani Israel. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepted his dua and he bestowed upon him Yahya. And Yahya is a prophet of Allah. And what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to Yahya alayhi salam, Ya Yahya, khudhi al-kitaba biquwwa. Because that's what you're all about. Yahya alayhi salam came to this world for what reason? As a ijaba, as an acceptance of the dua of Zakaria alayhi salam for the goodness of Bani Israel, for the religion of Allah to be established. So how the religion of Allah can be established? To take the book with quwwah. That's the entire deen to be established like this. خُذِ الْكِتَابَ بِقُوَّةٍ وَآتَيْنَاهُ الْحُكْمَ صَبِيًّا. We gave him the wisdom when he was young. It was said in the tafsir that someone would say to Yahya alayhi salam, let's go play. He said, مَا لِلَّعِبِ خُلِقْنَا. Let's go to play, which is the job of a child, right? That's fine with them because this is their children. But he was special, alayhi salam. He said, we're not created to play. So that means he has a mission to fulfill. So he took the book with strength, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestowed His favor upon him. And that's revealed in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So therefore, سمعنا وأطعنا, to listen and to obey, to bear the responsibility of the religion, to be obedient to Allah. This is a serious matter. And one of the things that one of the people in the past, he mentioned, without mentioning the name, he said that in هذا الدين ذو تبعات. And I think we mentioned that quote before. It's a beautiful one. Of course, we have sufficiency in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. But he said this deen, and this is not to scare anyone, but the matter is a serious one. Right? This is, in هذا الأمر إنه لقول فصل وما هو بالهزل. The deen of Allah, this is a speech that is fasl, separates the truth from falsehood. We're about fulfilling the truth and being away from falsehood, because there's Jannah and hellfire, everlasting Jannah or everlasting hellfire. The matter is a serious one. So it's not, the life is not a life of play and enjoyment. This is a serious life that we have to observe. And this is something that we need to constantly remind ourselves. So when he said that this deen has implications to it, if you are upon the deen, there are things that has to be done. So he said, الصوم والفطام شديد. Fasting and al-fitam, to be weaned, is a difficult thing. If you remember the month of Ramadan, no one would say that fasting is physically a pleasant thing, but you endure patience for the sake of Allah. It's a secret ibadah between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And to wean oneself, it requires some effort as a child, when a child is weaned. وَالْحَجِّ وَالْمَرَامُ بَعِيدٌ. Al-Hajj is a struggle. This is the jihad of women, as the Prophet ﷺ, he said, وَالْمَرَامُ, and what you seek is far. You have to travel far, you have to spend from your money, you have to, even though it's just counted days. But it's not something that comes when you're laying down in bed, for example. وَالصَّلَاةِ, and then listen what he said, وَالنَّوْمُ لَذِيذ. As-salah, the second pillar of Islam, and sleeping is a pleasant thing. You know what ladhid means? When something is delicious when you eat. But this is one of the very interesting things. Is a nawm, sleeping, is it something that tastes good or it feels good? But when a person is asleep, his mind is not present. So how can he enjoy sleep when he's not aware of his own self? This is something that the ulama talked about. You enjoy sleep. We all enjoy the fact that we can sleep, right? It's a ni'mah from Allah. But do you enjoy it after you wake up, or before you go to sleep, or while you're sleeping? Right? If it's after you go to sleep, that means you don't enjoy sleep. You already woke up, right? And if it's you, this is just something on the side. So, but the fact here is that as-salah wa-nawmu ladhid, when you're waking up from, someone is waking you up for salatul layl, qiyamul layl, or salatul fajr. This is the time when you see that how enjoying it is to continue for 5 minutes, for 10 minutes, for 1 hour to sleep. But you have to get up for the salah. This is the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He knows best. And this is how human beings are, for them to follow the obedience and the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَالزَّكَاةِ وَالْمَالُ عَزِيزٌ. There's always this struggle that you have to have a level of strength to fulfill the commands of Allah. As-zakah, which is a very small portion of one's wealth, if he has wealth and it's saved. But then, al-malu aziz, human beings are greedy by nature. So for you to believe in your heart that the portion of the zakah is not just to give it, but to have the belief in your heart that the portion of the zakah does not belong to you. This is a belief that has to be there. It belongs to the poor. It's their rights. So that means when you're giving the zakah, it's supposed to be with ease, because you're a decent person, you don't want to take the wealth of others. So this is how zakah is. You're not doing a favor for nobody. You're doing a favor for yourself, because if it stays with you one day late than when the zakah is due, you're committing a major sin. You are stealing someone's money that he is in need of. So it's a serious matter. So, and how the human beings are given this money, or they're given, entrusted with this wealth. Then he kept going with وَصِدْقُ الْجِهَادِ وَالرَّأْسُ لَا يَنْبُتْ بَعْدَ الْحَصَادِ. People go for the jihad fi sabilillah. The head does not get planted after it's cut off. I mean, this is something that a person would put even his life in a way that he might lose his life. So looking at things physically. وَالصَّبْرُ الْحَامِضِ. patience is bitter, and that comes from the cactus, the plant cactus in the desert. It's not something that is pleasant, it has some bitterness to it. وَالْعَفَافُ الْيَابِسِ, if you're trying to be chaste and away from explicit sins and so on, it's dry, it's not following your desires, you're holding yourself back. Right? وَالْجِدُّ الْخَشِنِ, to be serious, sometimes it's rough. وَالصِّدْقُ الْمُرِّ, when you have to speak the truth, sometimes it's also bitter, it's not easy. You would find your way out of things if you lie. Just simply lie and you get away with it. That's how many people they do. But you're commanded not to lie. And you're commanded to be upon as-sidq and truthfulness. Even if whatever happens, happens. وَالْحَقُّ الثَّقِيلِ, and the heaviness of the truth. And you're commanded to suppress your anger. And that's not an easy matter. So it requires the quwwah and the strength. And that's why after he mentioned these types of things, he says, وَالنَّاسُ رَجُلًا. The people are of two types of people. مُوَفَّقْ يُوعَظ فَيَقْبَلْ وَيَغْنَمْ. Someone that is guided and he is admonished, reminded, he accepts it. And he then, as a result of that, he benefits from it. وَمَخْذُولْ, the opposite of that is someone مخذول, someone that is let down, is not helped. تَأْخُذُهُ الْعِزَّةُ بِالْإِثْمِ فَحَسْبُهُ جَهَنَّمْ. The arrogance will overtake him. He would not accept and humble himself to this. So فَحَسْبُهُ جَهَنَّمْ, Jahannam would suffice for him. And as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clearly stated in the Quran in many verses, that whoever follow their desires, this is the path of Jahannam. Whoever follows the haqq, this is the path of Jannah. But it's by the mercy of Allah. So if we talk about the nusus that talks about the importance of taking things in a very serious matter and with the strength, look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, the life of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, serious life. And whoever is upon what is serious, then as mentioned before also, you don't have to really advise them too much of when it comes to having a break or time where they relax, because just the fact that they're not seriously working is sufficient for them, right? And whoever works hard, they can relate to this. If you work, 7 days in a row, 14 hours every day, right? And it's hard work, and you just barely sleep and you get up for work. After a few days, if they tell you that you have a day off, and if you do nothing on that day, you're such a state of enjoyment that you have. Why? Because you think that this is just the fact that you have a break because you're a busy person, you're someone that struggled. So this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us. If we don't have this, this is the path of failure in worldly matters and religious matters. And that's why the worst people that are in state of misery when it comes to even happiness in this life, those who they just fulfill their desire from one step to the other. They don't have this hard-working attitude in any matter. They're just lazy. They want to play and enjoy and play and enjoy, and they get tired of it, so they fall into depression and things like this. So human beings, they have to do what they dislike for them to be able to enjoy. And things get tight, and then the relief comes. And we just, the days of Hajj passed, and for those who went for Hajj, they would see that, right? And you would find, subhanAllah, the people when how they look in Hajj, for those who went for Hajj and for those who didn't. But still, the second day of Ayam al-Tashriq, right? It's a day of joy. Everybody's so happy. And everybody's so excited. I did this and I threw the jamarat, and after they've been going through the 8th of Dhul Hijjah in Mina, and then they went to Arafah, and then from Arafah to Muzdalifah, and then they went to make the tawaf and sa'i. If they did all of this, so after they finish the tawaf and sa'i and they make it to the camps in Mina, they feel that relief, even though they come to another struggle. But the excitement that they finished something, and it was only for 2 or 3 days. And this is how things are with the ibadah, with every matter in our life. So therefore, the nusus, the text that talks about these matters are, of course, this is the foundation of the deen, and therefore we have to take the religion seriously. And it's about sami'na wa ata'na, and we listen and we obey, and we learn the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to follow what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. And the hadith of Jibreel alayhi salam, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the fire and the Jannah. When He created the Jannah, He said to Jibreel, اذهب فانظر إليها. Go and look for Jannah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, but it's for us to learn, many benefits as a result of this. فذهب فنظر إليها ثم جاء. he went and he saw the Jannah and he came back. He said, أي رب وعزتك لا يسمع بها أحد إلا دخلها. No one will hear about it unless they will enter Jannah. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala حفها بالمكاره. He surrounded the Jannah with the مكاره, the dislikes. ثم قال, then he said, يا جبريل اذهب فانظر إليها. Go and look at Jannah. فذهب فنظر إليها. He went and he looked into the Jannah. ثم جاء, then he came back and he said, أي ربي وعزتك لقد خشيت ألا يدخلها أحد. I'm afraid that no one will enter Jannah. Why? Because the makarih, because the dislikes. That, as we always have to mention this, when you read the Quran makes you see with your heart what's beyond the physical dislikes and physical likes and so on. So beyond that is the Jannah of Allah. So hijabul Jannah, hujibatil Jannatu bil makari wa hujibatil naru bil shahawat. The Jannah has been sealed, not sealed, covered with the makari, the disliked matters. If you do the dislikes, you will enter Jannah. But it's not dislikes in the absolute sense. It's only following the commands of Allah, right? Which you have to oppose your desires. But opposing the desires with regards to the ahkam of the deen is such a deep and amazing part of knowledge that whoever reflect upon this and gain knowledge in the matter, he would just be in state of awe of how the miraculous ahkam and rulings of the deen of Allah. And that's why other ways of life, they failed miserably because it's from the human beings. If someone wants to be religious, what happens? They would oppose their desires and do crazy things, still they fall apart. They're not able to continue because it's against the human nature. Versus those who, when they see the matter like this, they run away from it. And you would find the perfect balance in the deen of Allah. There's no desire that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in the human beings according to the fitrah, not invented, corrupted desires, right? Because if a person has a desire to kill people, that's a desire, right? So if someone has a valid desire that we're created with, you would find a way to fulfill it, but it doesn't have to be like the way that other people would do. And you can go on with examples like this, right? For example, just a simple example. Al-Harir or silk is permissible for women and haram for men, correct? So for a man to wear pure silk, it's haram. But only harir is haram. You can wear cotton and wool and everything else, right? So, but someone would say, but the feel of the silk is completely different than the feel of something else. Yes. So it doesn't have to be in the same level of goodness. When people say, if you leave the haram, you will have something, better than the haram. It doesn't have to be like this physically. You would have an alternative, yes. You won't lose your life if you leave the haram. You will have something in place of it. It's not like you would not have any clothes to wear, or you would have clothes that would give you wounds and things like this. And even with the harir, it's permitted for those who have some skin diseases, right? If any types of clothes or the clothes that in their locality or whatever causes them to have harm, this might be, but for a person to seek this, then they have to have a fatwa. And this happened at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, permitted that for some of the Sahaba radiallahu anhu. But the point, we're not talking about the exceptions or the things that are of ease, but the norm is, it doesn't have to be that it's as the same enjoyment as it is with what Allah forbade. If someone, he drinks and he always intoxicates himself and he feels good about himself every time, and this is haram for you, leave it for the sake of Allah. Juice is halal. You can drink coffee, tea, whatever, right? But it's not the same when he feels high and intoxicated. Yeah, it doesn't have to be the same enjoyment. That's fine. You have to go because of the outcome of it and the harm that it causes. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade it. But He forbade it, and also for you to struggle with yourself to stay away from it. And there are human beings that they don't drink and they're not miserable in this life. But if you ask any Muslim, then that was raised not to drink, if you give him a choice to do that, you pay him money, do whatever, he won't do it. Even physically, he's not something that he would like to do. So human beings can change. So the point here is that whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade, there's an alternative which is halal. And when you see it, it's not forbidden in the absolute sense that everything becomes difficult for one's life and life becomes very tight and things like this. No, it's not the case. You would find the ease. But just it's a moment or days or months to be patient and to struggle with oneself till a person transforms himself to like what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permitted for him, and to enjoy the halal and to stay away from the haram. And it's a temporary life anyway, and everybody shall return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I would like, and I hopefully inshallah you're with me, inshallah, we're not saying any stories here or anything like this. That's why it requires to be awake. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he said something that about fitam al-nufus, when you have to wean yourself. So there is the weaning of a child and the weaning of oneself. Ala ma'lufatiha. You get used to do something. You get used to be lazy. You get used to all kinds of things that are harmful for you. So you have to wean yourself out of this. And that's why see what is benefiting for yourself. To make sure that you make the 5 daily salah in the masjid, for example, if you're a man. And if you're not used to it, then you need to wean yourself. The obligations, to fulfill it in the most perfect way. Something haram that you're used to do. Wean yourself. Is it going to be easy? It requires some struggle. Seek help from Allah. Make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Put yourself in the right environment. Right? And one day after the other, right, this will be removed from your system, if it's correct to say. So to have that weaning stage, he says, min ashaq al-umuri alayhi. One of the most difficult things for one's nafs, for one's being, is to wean ourselves from what we're used to, especially again if it's something that is not good or harmful. People do this with health, for health reasons. If someone is given the news that if they eat whatever they want, they would die. So what do? They would endure patience. And they would stay away from what they desire. Why? Because they know the value of life. Right? So human beings, they can relate to this. So to have the yaqeen and the certainty in the rewards from Allah. And the matter is about Jannah or al-'adhu billah, the hellfire. And the Jannah ghaliyah, the Jannah is expensive. But the expensiveness of Jannah is in the ability of every single human being. Just be patient with the commands of Allah. Stay away from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade. So, but then he mentioned a very specific matter here. And I hope that you guys are with me, paying attention. So if this is difficult, so we agree that to wean yourself from what you're used to, it's not something easy, it's difficult. So as a result of that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the religion of Allah, فَأُعْطِيَتْ بَعْضِ الشَّيْء. The nafs will be given some of the things, لِيَسْهُلَ عَلَيْهَا تَرْكِ الْبَاقِ. You have this amount of something, of a desire. This is haram, right? This part of it is haram. The rest of it is halal. So you're given something which is the halal to make it easy for you to leave the rest. And this is part of the deen. So whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permitted something, it's by the wisdom of Allah. If something is forbidden, it's by the wisdom of Allah. So you would find the ease comes by the exact rulings from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he says, فَإِنَّ النَّفْسَ إِذَا أَخَذَتْ بَعْضَ مُرَادِهَا قَنَعَتْ بِهِ. If the nafs is given some of it, some of what it desires, it will be content with it. So if it's then asked to leave the rest, and this is one of the ways of even tarbiyah for the children. A child, he wants 10 hours to do something or to play, right? So if you give him some, right, and then you ask him, I'll give you this for that much, but then we'll sit and do something. He will be okay with it, right? So you give some, and for the reason or for the sake of him leaving the rest of what is, for example, forbidden for him. He says, then the nafs will be at ease to leave what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade. And he says, هذه سياسة للشريعة مع النفس. الشريعة, الشرع, have some form of a siyasa with the nafs. What's siyasa? When you have someone is ruling you, the shara rules us. Right? The deen of Allah is in charge of our lives and our affairs. And if you have the knowledge of the deen of Allah and asking the people of knowledge, the shara has this siyasa, right? Not with tricks, not with lying, not with people making what Allah forbid halal. It's within the deen of Allah. So the matter that is to be taken gradual, and how to deal with oneself. This is haram, take this what's halal, you'll get satisfied with it, you get used to it, you will stay away from the haram, and so on. And he says, whoever reflect upon the matters of the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he would see the wisdom of the rulings, he would find it very clear. Right? فَإِذَا حَرَّمَ عَلَيْهِمْ شَيْئًا عَوَّضَهُمْ عَنْهُ. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade something for them, he would replace it by something that would be sufficient for them, and they would be content with it. As you know, then he mentioned the example, وَحَرَّمَ عَلَيْهِمْ النَّظَرِ. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade for you to look at a woman that is not halal for you to see, then he permitted for you to, if you want to be engaged, then you look for the one that you want to be engaged to. And of course, one's wife and so on. And the permissible means of seeing. For example, if you're in the court, right, they need to know who is that person that they're going to have a contract with or something like this. So it's permissible, right? It's permissible to see as a way of identifying oneself and other things, of course. And for example, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade an-nard, so sometimes the children, they ask about the dice. All the games that have dice in it, it's haram. It's not permissible, right? Because the nard or the dice by itself is mentioned in the text, not something that is forbidden by qiyas or analogy, or it takes a person away from important things. No, the Prophet ﷺ, he said it clearly because it was present at his time. And he said ﷺ in the authentic hadith in more than one narration, من لعب بالنرد أو من لعب بالنرد شير فكأنما صبغ يده في دم خنزير. Whoever plays with the dice as if he put his hands into the blood of the pig. Right? And in other narrations he had disobeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it doesn't matter then what is it. As long as you deal with the dice as a way of playing, whether it's on money or without money, it's something that is forbidden. But if something that is forbidden, other things are made permissible for a person. He says, كَالْمُسَابَقَ وَالنِّضَالِ, which is basically physical activities. Racing with one another, sports activities that is to be done with the boundaries of the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, and that's why we have to recognize this. And especially when a person lives in an environment, he sees that the worship of one's desire is what rules many people. Then we have to be wise, so that when we take, for example, our children from what they might be deceived with matters that is haram, to make them busy with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permitted, not to permit for them to do some haram so that they don't run away from the deen. Major difference, right? So for example, if people are mixing in a very extreme way, will allow some mixing which is still haram, but it's of a lesser haram. No one in the deen of Islam ever permitted something like this. There is no nusus in the deen of Islam that would ever claim such a thing. This is all from the hallucinations of people. It has nothing to do with the deen of Allah. This is completely different than when people are already in some form of a sin that they're committing and you're not able to change them. You might take them in a gradual way, but without you indulging with them in the haram. But to approve and to make and to create an environment yourself that would have some small little things of haram so that they avoid the major things of haram, there is no such a thing and basis to it in the deen of Allah. But then make them busy with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permitted. The Sahaba radiallahu anhu used to race with one another. Right? Salam ibn al-Akwa' was very fast. Radiallahu anhu, no one would beat him in this. The Prophet ﷺ with Aisha, as we know the narration, and other things, they would also race with the horses, with the archery, and they would do this, who win and things like this. And even there's a hadith about it that it's to be given prizes in these matters that would help them in matters in jihad and other than that. So this is forms of things for people to be easy for them. So there's so many different that even the salah itself, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you have to come and make salatul fajr in the masjid, but then it's permissible for you to sleep afterwards. It's not like you start your day with salatul fajr and then you pray. The imam has to pray for 2 hours and then you have to. The matter is so easy. It's something that is very simple. The same thing for the salawat, the same thing for fasting. Right? You fast and then at maghrib time you eat. It's haram for you to connect 2 days one after the other. And things of that nature. One of the things that we need to be upon so that we don't talk about many different things. 2 points inshallah ta'ala so that we have time for what is left. We need to be upon what is upright and what is good, right? So the most important thing is to be serious in matters of deen. In every matter in our life we need to be serious about it, because that's the original status of the human beings. And then when it comes to the matters of ease, there's guidelines that governs it. But one of the beautiful statements that Imam al-Dhahabi mentioned in his book Sir Alam al-Nubala, in mentioning some of the biography of one of the people, he said that the rectifying of 5 people in 5 things. A child, his salahu as-sabiy fil maktab, is when you send the child to the maktab, to the Quran circle where they learn the Quran and they learn adab and manners with it. and they become acquainted to how they're supposed to be. This is their salah. They're not into another level. But of course, with the children, this with the fact that they are not responsible for their actions, so they need to enjoy and to play, right? And this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created them in that stage to be in that. But then when someone is grown up to the next level, salahul fata, when someone is a fata, what's the fata? If you remember, we talked about that before. The one that is from 10 years old, or before that, 7 years old and above, or 10, before the age of puberty. Around that age is al-ilm, for them to, this is their seriousness. And it doesn't have to be the entire day and night. So when they're young in age, they play, right? But they go to memorize the Quran, they learn things, not for a long time. And actually, you know, the way that even the schooling system, it might be too much for the children. So it's a matter of ease. But they learn the manners, learn skills like discipline and learning the Quran and things like this. Once they grow up a little bit more, then they're able to understand things. So this is the ilm. And the salah of al-kahl, the old ones like myself, and where is the salah of these people? And al-kuhula, by the way, from the age of 40. So not necessarily very old in age. Is where their place of salah fil masjid, the masjid, the masajid, right? And not that the masajid is only the place for the old people, but it's for the shab, when a person is young and he is raised in the obedience of Allah. You know, it doesn't mean that it's only them. Everybody is in the masjid. But to rectify ourselves once we change from the age of being a children to be in the masajid and to fulfill the rules of the masjid and to learn our deen and to establish the ibadah, to be able to function in the rest of matters of our life. وَصَلَاحُ الْمَرْأَةِ, the rectifying place and the good place for rectifying the mar'ah, the woman, is in fil bayt, in the house. This is where women are supposed to be. They take care of their homes. This is their original place, right? And we don't have to go into the silly subject. That means they don't go out. No one with the minimum amount of reason would ever say such a thing. Sometimes people, they start saying silly stuff, or they claim, or you're saying women to stay home, never leave the house. Do you know anyone that locks up the women in the house and they never leave? Of course not. They go. Even the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, لا تمنعوا إماء الله مساجد الله. Do not prevent the women from the masajid of Allah. If she wants to go to the masjid, do not prevent her from going to the masjid. And of course, everything, even men, with the proper rules of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If someone comes into the masjid, a man, and Salatul Jama'ah is obligatory upon him, but he comes with shorts and things like this, he's not allowed. Then he needs to cover his awrah and welcome to the masjid, right? So to observe the rules that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded us to be upon. But when we talk about this is the original, this is the main seriousness that needs to be cultivated. So Salah Mar'a fil Bayt, and then the last one, Salahul Mu'thi. What is the way to rectify the harmful one? Fi Sijn, in prison, right? Don't they say Sijn? What they call it in Arabic? Islah wa Tahdhib, right? It's to rectify the people. Allahu A'lam if it. Sometimes the prison brings even, when people leave the prison, they graduate to be even worse, right? But the prison is supposed to be a time where people, they rectify themselves. If nothing is working, then they go to prison to change and to go back to their pure nature. So, but again, there is always the original place of a person, if it's correct to say original place. This is the place that a person needs to work on, and without undermining the other things. So, very brief in 2 minutes, inshallah ta'ala, when it comes to entertainment and things that are fun and things like this, as a rule, and this rule also we have to ask the people of knowledge, everything is permissible unless proven otherwise. But anything that is haram, then it's forbidden. Whether it's you're serious or you're joking or you're having fun, it doesn't matter. There's no such a thing that if you want to enjoy yourself, it's okay to compromise the deen and the rules of the deen of Allah. So al-ghiba is haram, backbiting. Mockery is haram. Right? If people are saying things to make people laugh, is it permissible to lie? It's not permissible. Even if the entire gathering, they know that it's a lie. Is it permissible? He would say, now I'm going to make a fake story and I'm going to lie for you to laugh. So everybody know that it's a lie. Is it permissible to say it? No. Lying is haram, right? So observing the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, reviling people, using language that is not permissible. So all the rulings of that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade has to be observed. Music, looking at something that is haram, exposing one's awra, mixing that is not permissible, leaving the wajibat, something that a person might be doing of goodness and everything, but the salah time comes and he continue to do whatever he's doing and not to come to the salah. That means it's not permissible, even if it's giving charity to someone. So we have to know the levels of deeds, not to harm others. You know, sometimes people, for them to enjoy themselves, they have to harm others with the sins that they commit or the fact that they are enjoying themselves, so they have to be extremely loud. So then they disturb their neighbors, for example. There's no such a thing as being permissible in that case. So things of that nature. So one point of it, avoid everything that is haram, even if a person is doing something that is of enjoyment. The second guideline here is that without undermining any of the wajibat, any of the obligatory actions, and this is something that has to be also known with matters of ilm, and some of it even with worldly matters. If you are working for a company from 8 to 2 or something, or 8 to 5, you know, this is the time for them. So can you take a time out from your own self to party, for example, and to have fun? No, it's not permissible unless they permit. It depends on the contract between them and yourself. Things like this. So, and one last point, because not everything has to be halal and haram, just as a way of upbringing and transforming ourselves. Anything that takes over the heart, then a person should stay away from it. As ulama mentioned, and even at the time of the early generations of Islam, with things that are enjoyable. So even for something like a sport, right? A child likes to play soccer, for example. That's fine with all of the guidelines that is mentioned. Not haram, not overtaking the obligations, no bad language, whatever, all the rulings are applied, right? But then it's taken over his heart. He's obsessed with it, right? If he misses it one time, he cries and this and that. That means something wrong. That means he's not putting it in the right perspective. So this is another aspect of it. And this is something that if we go on with this, there's so many incidents at the time of the early generations of Islam with regards to these things that sometimes people might be obsessed with. So that's then the subject of gamings and things of that nature. So we have to be careful with that, especially that the first two guidelines can be observed. Something that might be haram, or people are taking others step after the other to do haram when it's not clearly haram. You know, these things, and when people play games and you have gods and goddesses and things like this, is that permissible? Of course it's haram. You know, and the subject of the games is something else, but even the content of things, we have to be extremely careful, because it's meant to be, it's not just a thing for people to play, but it's an industry to change the way people think. So, and then definitely a person should avoid all of this. Should raise our children to be away from this. There's no benefit to it. It does not increase anything to them, and to make them busy with what does not distort their fitrah and their pure nature. And this issue of the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to make the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with observing what, you know, as one of the early generations, it was said that Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, his son one time was late for the salah. I'm not saying that for you to do with your children, right? He was the Khalifa, and his child was late for the salah, and it was said because he was busy combing his hair. So he ordered his murabbi, the one that used to have a murabbi. The murabbi, al-khulafa, the Khalifa would have someone, his job is to make sure that he educate his son discipline and manners, and like the kings they do to their children, things like this. So he ordered him to shave his head. His heart got attached to it. He's obsessed with his hair. That would make him even delay the salah because he's busy with his hair. Remove it, right? So that it's a lesson for him that you should not get obsessed with things that would make you a slave to it, right? And you be in control of your own self. Again, so it's not a call for people to shave their heads, but I'm saying, are you obsessed with something that is even permissible, that makes you, or the love of it takes over the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us benefit and to make us among those who are steadfast upon the deen of Allah. Sallallahu alaihi wa sallam, baraka Muhammad wa sahbihi wa sallam.